But I just want to say welcome to everybody who's listening in. I hope you all well wherever you are in the world. And I know a lot of you have registered from different places, different businesses, different countries, government, business, designers, etc. So it's really, really cool to have you all here today. As we were talking earlier, I can't believe it's Defrost number 60. We've had some amazing people come into our Defrost over the years, and amazing guests across a wide range of industries. But first of all, I want to do a welcome to country. I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians, both past and present, of the lands on which we live and work today. We're passionate about designing a better world at Frost Collective, and we love surrounding ourselves with other people who have that same passion. And what we love more is people have that passion who actually make those ideas come to life. We've got a 3-part series, brands taking positive action, and focusing on contributing to a sustainable future, which it's vital that we play a part in that. We'll be hosting a 3-part series. I'll be hosting a 3-part series along with my co-host, Head of Frost brand, Debbie Spence. Welcome, Debbie.
Thank you. You can make me Head of Frost if you like.
You just got a promotion, Deb.
Oh God, here we go. It's a double act. We have a special guest today, Kate Rayson. Who's a Director of Marketing and Business Development at Pollination. And Kate has dedicated her career to ensuring organizations are walking the talk when it comes to sustainability, environments, and the greater good. Kate's vast experience stretches across multiple industries, from her work heading up Qantas Future Planet, which is the world's largest airline offset program, to her role as engagement manager at WWF, establishing her as a champion of sustainability and as an expert in creating new forward-thinking brands whose purpose is to drive change and realize new ways of achieving positive environmental outcomes. Welcome, Kate.
Thanks, Vince.
So we're going to kick this off with a series of questions. I think we've got about 10 questions that we're going to go through, and as any kind of conversation, that might expand, and I'm sure it will. We've also got a poll, 2 questions on the poll that we want you to ask or take part in when those go live. And also, in terms of chat, say hi in the chat, and also put any questions up also as the talk goes that you might want to contribute to. So again, thank you so much for joining. It's really, really cool. I'm going to start with a question, Kate, just in terms of kind of asking you kind of a quick kind of background of your career.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks so much. So my career reasonably varied, but there is kind of a narrative that you can draw through it. So I started out, my background's in marketing and comms. I started out, like many people I'm sure on the call, in agency land. So I worked for a PR and marketing agency based in Adelaide. We worked across a bunch of different sectors and clients. I moved into in-house roles in marketing for a couple of years, but a really formative part of my career and a big part of how I've ended up where I am today at Pollination was a role that I took up actually living and working in Vietnam. The Australian government used to have a program called AAD where they placed early career professionals in NGOs in developing countries in the region. And so I was working in a comms role for a Vietnamese NGO who did some climate change work, actually. And the reason I kind of dwell on this part is because it was the first, it sounds kind of naive now saying it, but it was the first really experience for me that connected this idea that the things that you cared really deeply about, you could actually make your work. And that was really exciting. So it was the first kind of connection that I had with purpose-driven work. So when I moved back to Australia and to Sydney, I was really excited then to be able to sort of continue that purpose-driven work and take up a role at WWF, the Environment Parity, the Panda, where I ended up as head of digital campaigns and engagement. And then I suppose where it started to kind of veer back into commercial was a role that I took up at Qantas. as you said, working with Qantas Future Planet, which was within the sustainability team at Qantas, but running our carbon offset program and business in the end. A thing that not many people know is that through Qantas Future Planet, we worked with other big Australian corporates on their own carbon neutral products and services. So that was where I sort of started engaging, not just with Qantas, but with other corporates around the issue. And I suppose that was a really exciting role because it brought together my sort of earlier commercial experience, but still in that purpose-driven work. And then Pollination happened. So I started at Pollination 12 months next week, actually. And we a new business that launched in November. We're a climate change advisory and investment firm, laser focused on accelerating the transition to a net zero emissions future. So, it feels like that kind of reasonably random kind of experience has led to and perfectly placed for this new role, which I'm really enjoying.
Wow, that's an incredible career.
Yeah, what a journey. It's been a pleasure working with you and the Pollination team over the last 12 months, Kate. It's great to see where you are now and what you've achieved as an organisation. I know you mentioned your experience in Vietnam and working for an NGO. Is that, and now you've obviously got a really in-depth, unusually in-depth understanding of particularly climate change. Is it something that you've been passionate about personally in your personal life, or is it when you actually got into that role in Vietnam that was the impetus for it?
Yeah, look, I think I always had a natural interest in it, but it was certainly in that role. This might be a bit of a tangent, but it was a really funny experience because I think in Australia, still we have a pretty warped view of climate change and where the rest of the world is at in terms of understanding and tackling climate change. And I won't dwell on the negative, but it was this funny thing when I got to Vietnam, and my role as a comms professional, I was doing a lot of writing for the organisation and case studies, and reasonably conservative government there, and we were always very conscious of what we were saying, and so I sort of started with my Australian lens or hat on, talking about purportedly climate change could be doing this, or it's possible that climate change that, and my colleagues are looking at me going, what? Of course climate change is happening, and it's and we're feeling the effects of it already, and and I laugh. It's not funny, and for the communities they worked with, it was really serious, obviously, even 10 years ago. But yeah, it was this sort of very unusual experience for me where I just realised how unique our perspective in Australia, I think, because of the politics around climate is in terms of our view on things. But yeah, so look, sustainability is always something that I'd been passionate about. But like I said, that role in Vietnam was just so exciting because it was the idea that you could make something that you were really passionate about your work.
Mm. And then were you evangelical about it when you came back to Australia?
Yeah, so we have really good and healthy discussions around the dinner table in my house, my family home, around this stuff. My family are third-gen farmers, and so climate change it's an interesting conversation, but my family and that the farming sector are absolutely on the front line of climate change in Australia. So, certainly spurred a lot of conversation.
So, yeah, interesting dinner parties. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, thanks for that. It's great to understand your personal connection with sustainability as well. Thinking about companies and brands, and for us, the conversations that we've been having with companies and brands around sustainability are really broad these days. Going back my 20-year career in branding. And in the last few years in particular, we've noticed the market shift from talking about corporate social responsibility, or ESG, as a separate silo. That's it in the past. And now it's much more integrated. And then most recently, we're actually creating brands and brand strategy that's built on the foundations of a sustainable agenda. In your life, obviously, sustainability has been part of your life for a long time now, but how have discussions around sustainability changed over the years for you?
Yeah, you're right. It's absolutely changing and has changed significantly in the last few years. So I think, we started out with, not part of my early career, probably before my time, but in the 90s and sort of in early 2000s, which is my career, there was this idea of CSR as, it was almost like you had your core business over here, and then CSR was sort of like this philanthropic, maybe charity kind of activity that you did over here. And, not for all organisations, but for some it might be that, we're doing this charity work over here to maybe make up for some of the things that we're doing over here. But, they were quite separate. And then I think in big organisations, earlier on we saw sustainability. If you're in a big organisation, you might have had one or two sustainability people, but they were quite carved off from the organisation. Maybe they did a report once a year or something. But they certainly didn't have a seat at the executive table, and they weren't, decision makers at that level. It was quite separate. And so I think you're right. We do it too. There is this huge shift now where sustainability is not something off to the side. It is central to the way that you do business. It's part of your strategy today. It's helping shape decisions about how you'll do business, tomorrow. And I think the other interesting thing is also the way that it's evolved, where now, it's not just what's happening directly inside your control, inside your business, but there's this sense of responsibility for sustainability in your whole value chain or your whole supply chain. So, yeah, absolutely, that shift and it becoming core business is something that we see. And for organisations, like Pollination that are new, it is it's obviously much easier to bake that in from the start, and have that as part of your, say in Pollination's experience, our values, the people that it's what we look for in the people that we hire. It's the standards, we set for behaviour in the organisation. It shapes our strategy, so where we operate, who we work with, how we actually produce, our service, or if you're in a product industry, the product you produce. So, for organisations starting out, it is a great opportunity to be able to bake it in from the start. But certainly, existing organisations, it's becoming a part of the core way that they do business now too. There's on the screen here, I think, thanks for sharing, there's the sort of question is, well, where is the change coming from, or like why is it becoming part of core business? And the answer is that there are so many factors. There are a whole range of different drivers and pressure points for sustainability inside organisations. So there's a few on the screen here, and this is sort of, not an exhaustive list, but, it's coming from investors, it's coming from regulators, it's coming from customers, it's coming from the employees that we want to attract and retain. If you're a big company, it might be coming from your shareholders and shareholder actions and climate, and litigation. There's this whole kind of ecosystem of stakeholders that are driving sustainability to be part of core business.
Yeah, right.
What attracted you to Pollination in the first place?
The purpose. So, climate's the issue that I want to work on, and Pollination, has been designed to be laser focused on one thing, and that, that is accelerating that transition to net zero and to a climate resilient future. So, yeah, it perfectly aligns with the purpose-driven work that I want to do. I think also, though, I really believe in the theory of change for pollination. So maybe a bit more about pollination. Climate change is a very complex problem. That's probably an understatement. And, to unlock change and for money to flow into this new decarbonised economy, we really do, I believe, need to take a holistic view of the challenges. And so Pollination is very deliberately bringing together, experts from across the world who are experts across different parts of the climate change ecosystem. So we've got people who are experts in policy, who are experts in investment, in corporate strategy, in law. And so when you bring those people together, in COVID times, figuratively around one table, and you tackle, a challenge for a big client, say, like one of our clients, BHP, when you bring all of these different perspectives together, it's their different experiences and ideas and connections and networks that can actually unlock solutions at a scale that, we might not have seen before. So, it's certainly not, I really believe that when it comes to sustainability and then to the issue of climate change, there are so many actors that are required, and different actors that have a place in tackling this issue. But I think that Pollination is coming at it from a really unique place, and I'm really excited and really believing, I suppose, the hypothesis.
Yeah. And on that note, it has been quite a journey over the last 12 months since you launched. How would you describe that journey so far? Have there been any unexpected challenges along the way?
Look, it has been a wild ride. We're scaling we're growing really quickly. So, like I said, we launched in November. We're at last count, and by last count, I mean on our global call last night, I think we're about 40 people in about 8 or 9 countries now. And I think, I'm really proud talking about that growth, because that growth is absolutely linked to the pace of positive change that is happening out there in business, businesses and with government. So, the Paris Agreement, which I think 192 countries have signed up to, which sets us on a path to net zero emissions by 2050. That commitment is catalysing change at this huge pace, and that's why Pollination is growing so quickly. I think, and you can't sugarcoat it. There's a lot in our work that is pretty doom and gloom and, pretty scary. And I definitely feel that. But at the same time, with the work that we're doing and the conversations that we're having and, the scale of ambition and action, not just words, but actual action that we're seeing with organisations and governments and investors that we're working with or talking to, it's impossible not to feel hopeful. I really do think there's hope. So, I think pleasantly surprised at just how right the timing seems and how much appetite there is for change and action, which is really exciting. Maybe like as an anecdote, so we last week we launched a joint venture with HSBC, the big global bank. The venture is to launch in the next 12 months the first of a number of large-scale funds that will invest in natural capital. So natural capital is nature-based projects or assets like sustainable forestry or regenerative agriculture or blue carbon projects with oceans. And, the first fund aims to raise and to invest $1 billion into nature-based projects with a series of funds that will end up investing $6 billion. So, HSBC, they are one of the largest financial institutions in the world, but they're fully committed to that venture and to that action. Start to finish, actually, that partnership came together in just 5 months and all over Zoom because of COVID. So the commitment and the ambition that's out there is, it gives me a great deal of hope.
And Kate, you trebled in size since last year, which is pretty incredible. How have you gone about doing that and kind of maintaining your brand values with such growth?
Yeah, so, and there's a slide actually, I think maybe with our values on it. So yes, we're growing quickly, which, like I said, is if we do things right, means good things for the planet, which is good. But the values piece is really interesting. It has been such a fundamental part of or foundation for the organisation, I suppose. So Debbie will remember because she led us through our first team workshop. It was the first time that at the start, it was about 12 of us. The first time we came together was for a series of brand workshops. And a huge part of that was developing our values. So, right from the start, it was something that the organisation placed a great deal of value on. We developed 4 values out of that process. And then 3 months later, after we'd launched, we came together for the first time face-to-face as a team. So our UK and US colleagues at the time came to Australia and we were all together, and we decided as a group there was a real passion to add a 5th value that kept being talked about, which is thoughtful transformation. And I think, again, that just kind of shows, right from the start, just how much the fact that people, were so passionate about spending time nutting this piece out when we had such, when time is so valuable, particularly at that point. That really speaks volumes. So look, it was the first thing that we did, and Debbie and the team expertly guided us through that, thankfully, because we all had lots of ideas, and we probably would have ended up with 100 values had we not had their great guidance. But they're also part now in terms of how we, it's all well and good to come up with these great values and they sound excellent, and that's good, but it's like, how do you actually embed them? And so they're a huge part of our recruitment strategy. So typically for our kind of mid-tier and junior roles, we have a 3-stage recruitment process. The first interview is a values-based interview. So it's not technical at all. It's to understand whether the person is the right cultural and values fit for the organisation. And it's really, it's really interesting, the feedback that we've had from people who have gone through that process is that, for a lot of them, they are excited at the prospect of joining Pollination to start with, but then when they see, just how much value we place on values, that, they're even more passionate about the opportunity. So, yeah, we've had really great feedback from that. And then in terms of, inside the organisation and how we embed them, there's a couple of things that we're doing regularly. So weekly we have a one team global call. We're obviously all across time zones and that makes things tricky, but we have one call a week where we're all together, and a regular, like the second agenda item is a value share. So someone in the team will share an example from the last week where they've seen our values in practice inside the organisation. And then second to that, actually, as an Australian team, we catch up once a week and do a health check. And there are 3 questions that we answer around the impact we're having as an org, our personal well-being, but also our values. And so, again, how well do we think that we've seen our values lived in the last week? So really, they are part of the conversation on a twice weekly basis at least. Yeah.
Amazing. That's great to hear.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm getting a bit of a refurb there. I think Debbie's got a question now.
Yeah, we're seeing some positive implications pulling out change in the way people work and interact these days because of coronavirus. And we're seeing it as an opportunity. There are lots of new conversations that we're having with brands and organisations, and they're taking the time to take a step back and look at their strategy and look at how sustainability might play a role in that. So we're very much on the positive receiving end, I guess, of the change in the situation. And thinking ahead, so the economic, we're already seeing Australia's in a recession officially as of yesterday. The economic impacts of coronavirus will reverberate for years to come. In what you've seen in your experience, are sustainable companies, so companies that put sustainability at the heart of what they do, are they more resilient? Will they weather this storm better than others, or are they just as likely as others to go under?
Yeah. There's a couple of things on that. First of all, I think it's interesting you know, talking about the conversations, the new conversations you're having with businesses in the coronavirus, you know, context about sustainability. You know, it's certainly something that we've seen at Pollination. Often one of the biggest challenges or barriers to kind of, you know, sustainability action is the status quo, you know, and inertia. And so I think what coronavirus, you know, what this situation has done is there's no such thing as business as usual anymore. Sort of, you know, everything's changed. And so I think that businesses are more open to conversations around, okay, well, you know, within this context of change, what should we be doing in terms of looking forward? And I think also it has really, you know, highlighted in really devastating ways just the need for resilience within our businesses. And, you know, obviously coronavirus is, you know, it isn't an environmental or climate change directly issue. But it does, there are lots and lots of parallels if you think about, you know, how lots of businesses and the economy broadly has been kind of caught out from a resilience perspective. So, you know, I think it has put climate change and that long-term thinking into people's minds. In terms of whether businesses will be that focus on ESG, you know, are more resilient and will perform better in the long term, there's some really interesting research. BlackRock, again, the world's largest fund manager, they did some research, I think 3 months into the global economic crisis, you know, a few months ago, and found that companies with stronger social and environmental scores were performing better than companies that didn't overall. And I think, you know, that's attributed to a whole bunch of things, but including that from an investment perspective, companies that perform well on environmental and social scores, you know, sustainability scores, are seen as a better, more resilient long-term investment. And so they have fared better in terms of being able to maintain and attract investment during really turbulent times. So yeah, I mean, there are data points out there that are already showing that that companies with a focus on sustainability, you know, fare better in tough economic times, which I think is, you know, is very positive, but also something for businesses to be thinking about.
Mm-hmm. I wonder whether that's a good time to go to one of our questions from the participants. John Clark, who's asked, how are you convincing shareholders to change over dividend and dollars, basically? So I wonder whether that BlackRock argument is a good source and a good argument for that is we don't have to compromise sustainability and sustainable purpose for profit.
Yeah, it's not. It is increasingly, and you would say today, it's not a choice between doing good for the world and doing good from an investment perspective. They are one and the same, and that's what, you know, the joint venture that we've launched with HSBC and investing in natural capital assets. You know, that exactly embodies that. It's the idea that, you know, you can deliver good long-term returns as well as you know, doing better and doing good for the planet, and, you know, addressing climate change and protecting and enhancing nature. You know, they're not two separate things. You know, and there's yeah, and I think that BlackRock research certainly indicates that or reinforces that idea as well.
Yeah. I know for us as a business, it's something that is a commercial reality. Like as we're assessing, you know, the opportunities and also our responsibility as an organisation, there is always an implication. So there's a calculated trade-off there that we have to consider about our role as a business and people's jobs, etc. So yeah. Thanks for that question, John.
Yeah, he's given us a thumbs up. Good. He's happy with the answer.
Good.
I mean, I think a lot of businesses struggle, probably a lot of smaller businesses too, struggle with this, the idea of knowing what to do. What advice would you be giving business owners on looking for ways of making positive change or positive actions on sustainability?
Yeah. Actually, that kind of nicely links to John's question as well, I think. So I might make kind of a top-level statement, but then get into some kind of specific practical ideas for what you can do. But the first thing I would say to that is I think one of the biggest barriers, and again, potentially, particularly in Australia, because of how toxic the politics is around some of these issues, is that there's this outdated view that addressing sustainability or climate change is a philanthropic endeavour and makes you a greenie. It does not. That is not. It's just not the case anymore. It is about building long-term success and resilience in your business in a global business landscape that is moving very fast, and where the expectation and the bar for what's considered best practice is continuing to shift. And so if you're a business owner, this has to be on your agenda. And if you work in a business, raising sustainability or agitating for action, it doesn't make you a greenie. It makes you very commercially and economically rational. Like it is not a philanthropic endeavour. Into then, how some practical tips. And I've been trying to think about this because, like, the caveat is it depends what business you're in, and it depends what industry you're in, and it depends what size you're in. But there are some places that might be a good place to start for lots of businesses. One is B Corp, which is a certification or a standard for businesses looking to, I suppose, verify their social and environmental performance. It's big in the US, pretty big in the UK, and it's getting bigger in Australia. I know Frost, we were chatting, you guys are going through the process at the moment. We as Pollination are going through it at the moment too. The thing about B Corp is it is rightly and thankfully a reasonably arduous isn't the word, but like it's a stringent process and it can take time. So whether or not you decide to actually go down and become a registered or certified B Corp is one thing, but the B Corp website basically just has a whole raft of resources and thought starters and information that can help a business start to think about what can we be doing from a social and environmental sustainability perspective. So yeah, I'd highly recommend jumping on there. There are free toolkits, resources, and you can actually kind of there's a survey that you obviously go through as part of the verification process, and you can take that survey and it just might start prompting a whole bunch of ideas around workforce, environment, community, and governance. So that would be one place to start thinking and looking. Another thing that I think businesses, particularly on the environmental sustainability front, there's a framework that we used to work with corporate partners with at Qantas, Future Planet, and it was 3 steps: measure, reduce, influence. So measure sounds so obvious, but it is wild how many businesses have no idea what their environmental footprint is, and that might be their carbon emissions, their water use, their waste. There's a whole raft. And what happens typically when you measure is that you identify a whole bunch of low-hanging fruit of things that you can do that are good for the planet and good, reduce your footprint, but also usually save you money. So there's a great Qantas example when they, this is some years ago now, but started to more deeply look at their carbon emissions. They worked out that they were burning, a whole bunch of their emissions were from planes that were on the tarmac at the gate that had the engines going, burning fuel, so that they could turn the lights on and the air conditioning as you got on the plane. Terribly inefficient from an emissions perspective. And so they worked with airports and had, basically power plants installed so that you get access to mains, to the grid for mains power, so to be able to turn on the lights and keep the air conditioning running while you hopped on the plane. Huge saving in emissions right there. Obviously very good for the planet, very good for their fuel bill. Same thing, they used to have both engines running when they taxi out to the runway. They only needed one. So the point is, measuring as a first step will often identify a whole bunch of stuff that just seems so obvious once you work it, once you see it. Reduce then what you can. There might be then some longer term, harder stuff that you start prioritizing and working towards in terms of reducing. And then the third step, influence, is I think arguably the most exciting step, and that is looking at how can you take both what you've learned, but also the power that you have within your industry or your supply chain, and use that for good to influence others to take action as well. So, yeah, that would be measure, reduce, influence. Think about that as kind of a bit of a framework for starting action.
Yeah, that's a great response. We got a question from Swati saying, are design agencies too eligible for B Corp certification?
Yeah.
Kate mentioned that Frost Collective is under review. Did I hear that right? Yes. We've been actually, anyone listening in who's been working with us would know that we've been applying for, I think, a very long time. I think it's like a year and a half, actually. But we're that close. We're that close. We almost gave up. Thankfully, we've persevered. And actually, I highly recommend it because it changes. It helps you refocus your business, refocus your policies, fair work, etc. And it's just, it really is brilliant. It's the standards that we need, and any organization and design company, which every day we're working on projects where we can positively influence the outcome of projects, whether it's specifying materials or giving advice or helping people with their brand values like we have with your team. Designers, I think designers, hopefully they realize the power of not just designing, but advising and counseling and looking out for ways of doing things better, for the world.
Yeah.
John's another question there.
The fundamental premise of design is, how do we make this better, right? It's always, how do we improve on something that exists already? But Kate, that framework you just mentioned, when you think about it, it feels obvious, right? Without the framework, people just don't know where to start. I know we were similar with the B Corp application. Like, wow, we hadn't considered that our policies and parental leave and those things actually could have an implication on sustainability. So having those frameworks really helps.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it does. I mean, to say measure seems so obvious, but I say it because organisations, often that is a good first step that they have not taken yet. So yeah, absolutely. And there are, B Corp again is a great framework. There's lots out there.
What else is out there? What help is out there for businesses beyond B Corp, which again will attest as a great resource? What else is out there for businesses who want to be more sustainable?
Yeah, this is the thing. So as the transition, as the economy decarbonizes and the global transition ramps up, there is so much. There are so many incentives and support and resources and financial support, that I think is out there. But it is a matter of going looking for it. So, and we see it in our business. So because, at one end of the economy scale, you've got banks, governments, large listed companies who are all, under pressure, as we've talked about, from those different stakeholders to mitigate their climate risk and to reduce their impact. So they are now turning and looking at, looking down their value chain at how they can influence and support businesses that they work with to be more sustainable. So like a tangible example, we work with at Pollination, we work with a company that produces dairy products. At one end of their, at the start of sort of their value chain, or close to the start, are farmers, dairy farmers. This business doesn't actually own farms, but obviously, milk is the key input to their dairy products. And agriculture, has a huge exposure to sustainability and to climate risk, both from a physical impacts perspective, so extreme weather events like drought, water scarcity, these are increasing issues that agriculture is coming up against. And then from a transition risk perspective, agriculture is a big emitter. And so as more and more policy comes in that impacts big emitters, that's going to be an increasing challenge for ag too. So we've got this client, who are a big listed company. They've got big, large institutional investors that are going to them and saying, what are you doing to reduce, your impact and to mitigate that risk that sits in your value chain? Even though you're not a farmer and you don't own farms, that is, we expect you to deal with that, to build, resilience in your business, in a warming world. And so, what's happening there, though this company doesn't own their farms, they're picking up that issue, and they've just launched a multi-million-dollar impact fund that includes, major grants and finance basically that's available to farmers to reduce their emissions. So it might be things like putting big solar infrastructure on their dairy sheds, or batteries, because actually it turns out that your dairy is most active early in the morning and late at night, and there's not as much sun, so a battery is really handy for your solar system. So there's that kind of stuff. There's a whole bunch of infrastructure and upgrades that you can get for water efficiency to reduce the amount of water that you need. So if you're coming into longer and more frequent droughts, that's really important. So, for these farms, they're looking up their supply chain, and there is, there's help and support available. The same thing, banks now, and this is outside of necessarily, if you're a farmer and you in dairy, but for all businesses, there's just a growing number of green finance products, so discounted loans basically for sustainability related investments and infrastructure and initiatives in your business, because banks are doing the same thing. They're having to look, and governments are putting pressure on banks. So banks are now looking, going, okay, well, how do we look down our value chain and have an influence? So there are, there are a whole raft of places that that businesses of all types and all sizes can be looking up and down their supply chain and with their financiers in particular to be able to get support.
Yeah, because even in our experience, the intent is there. We want to do better, and we want to bake sustainability into everything that we do. But it's been hard to find support and how to find those frameworks and constructs that we can work to, beyond B Corp. Vince has been passionate about it as the CEO of Frost for years. But so we've all got the best intentions. It's what do we actually do, and how can we do something about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, in that same example, with the company that we're working with who produce dairy products, they have labels that go on their products, and so now a big focus for them is working with their suppliers of plastic labels and how they can make those better. It is, I suppose, a key point there is don't go it alone. Look at who is it that's in your ecosystem, or in your business ecosystem, and who can you work with to tackle some of this stuff.
I think that what happened, obviously, prior to COVID, we had the big fires here, which did, it was scary, wasn't it? I mean, it really made it very clear that something needs to change. And we found within days, clients knocking on our doors asking for advice, or people who were very conscientious, people who wanted to do good, were coming to us and starting new businesses and around making positive change to the world, etc. And I find that incredible. It gives me real faith in humanity. It's no longer alternative. It took that big scary time for a lot of people And obviously COVID kind of is like lessened it a bit, but I think people are still focused on, they're obviously very concerned about economies and everything, but people are generally doing good. And I just think that's fabulous. We've talked about it for years, and there's been the odd person kind of wanting to do something that's, or seen as being alternative, but this is now the norm, the new normal, right?
The mainstream, yeah. And I think the other thing with that is like to kind of take a step away maybe from the, the view of this from a business or organization perspective. For me personally, in a number of jobs that I've had in the last few years, a number of roles in different organizations, don't underestimate the influence that one or two very passionate people and smart people can have in huge institutions and organizations and businesses. Like some of the most phenomenal, in banks, in airlines, in energy companies, like some of the greatest change is coming from at the start, not towards the end. Usually once it's successful, everybody jumps in, but at the start coming from, one or two really clever and passionate people. So yeah, I think if it's something that if you're in an organization and you feel like they could be doing more, agitate, do something, step up. It's amazing what you can achieve.
It's really, we do this ourselves over the last few months. We've actually had workshops internally, and any company can do this. And we said to our team, like, how can we design a better world? What could we do? And oh my God, they presented to me a couple of days ago, their thinking. And the young team, it kind of makes me actually realize that I am older than the other guy. Not 60 yet. But it made me realize how amazing that kind of that youth and ambition and that openness and that can-do attitude. It just made me feel amazing to see that the team that we have actually taking ownership of that, and having phenomenal ideas that we're working on activating.
Yeah.
And it's really cool to see your company actually have that voice, like you said, that it shouldn't be kind of in the background, that it actually bring it to the forefront, be very inclusive around that. And I think that goes a long way.
Yeah.
I often kind of sit there going, okay, scratch my head, what I don't have the answers. I don't know what to do. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. And be open to that. Be open to the fact that you don't have the answers for everything, and that we're all kind of grappling around with that. But we'll find our way. We'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think individuals and organisations are stepping in. We've had this conversation about, is it actually the role of government? And we've just looking at the poll from the participants, 100% of people have agreed that to create impact at scale, governments must step in. So individuals and businesses can't achieve it alone. What do you think about that, Kate?
Yeah, that's interesting. So we did at Qantas, there was a longitudinal piece of research that we repeated annually. We did actually in partnership with Harvard University, have a research unit called the STAR Lab, which stands for Sustainability, Transparency, Accountability Research. I got it. Anyway, so yeah, in partnership with the STAR Lab, we did this piece of research that was tracking Australian consumer sentiment around sustainability. And what we started to see in the past couple of years was that more and more people were, so it's interesting to see these results because more and more people were expecting, I think, in the absence of government action, they were pushing their expectation for action onto businesses. So we saw people's expectations of government to act reducing and people's expectations of business to act increasing. And so our message, seeing that research was always that if you are a business and you think that, customers have let you off the hook and that it's government's job, forget about it. That is not what consumers think. Consumers are, and consumers are people, Australians, Australian people are expecting that, or they've at least got an increasing expectation of business to act. And it's not to say that, of course, government has a role and, people expect that. But it was really interesting to see potentially as the perception that government was stepping away, that it was that expectation was shifting on businesses to kind of fill the void, if you like. So, yeah, I haven't seen that research in the last 12 months, but I would love to know what the latest is, particularly after the fires and all this. Yeah, that definitely feels like a devastating, but milestone kind of moment in sentiment around this stuff, which it sounds like you guys are hearing through the conversations you're having with clients and potential clients as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it's individuals and agitators that are putting increased pressure on organisations to do something and to take action.
Yeah. I mean, on that slide before, I had the ecosystem of stakeholders that are, driving pressure, talent being one of them. And one of them, I suppose, more from a talent perspective, it can be about attracting the best and brightest talent and keeping it. But also from a keeping it perspective, Google and what's that? I have to pull the slide up now. I think it was Google and Facebook, Google or Amazon last year. Yeah, they had thousands of their employees signing an open letter demanding that their businesses take stronger climate action, and then walking out of on the job for 48 hours around that demand. So, it's definitely a trend that we're seeing more of. People expect the organisations that not just they buy from or that they engage with, that they actually work in to be doing more.
Yeah, and that commitment to sustainability is becoming just as important as the other performance measures. Thinking about talent and investors, and what should people look for if they're evaluating if a company is really committed to sustainability? How do we know they're not, just investing in greenwashing? How do we know that it really is legitimate?
Yeah, it's a tricky one, but I mean, transparency is on the rise. The expectation for transparency is on the rise. The internet is a wonderful thing. It means that there's more information available. In terms of evaluating that information, though, and whether, it's just spin or whether it's the truth, I think it depends on what kind of a business you're looking at. But, there's a whole bunch of third parties out there, and I'll maybe in the Australian context reference a couple that do a lot of the hard analysis for you. So Market Forces is a great one when it comes to anything to do with your money. So that's investments in super, in insurance, and in banking. So they are continuously evaluating financial institutions' performances, on ESG and very publicly sharing that information. There are, again, from a kind of consumer perspective, from, energy choices in your life, who your power comes from and those kind of things. I think CanStar and Choice do great evaluations. So the point being, there are lots of third-party organisations who do a lot of the hard work for you and help you cut through the spin. I think, there are standards, things like B Corp, things like for carbon neutral products and services in Australia, the Australian government has a certification which is Climate Smart, a stamp or a mark as well. So, again, that kind of third party. The other thing I'd say is if you're looking into it yourself, organisations who kind of a proxy for credibility is how the breadth of sustainability focus. So if an organisation is looking at environment, at its employees, workers' right, at governance, at its supply chain, responsible sourcing, modern slavery, that kind of, like if they seem to be reporting across the board, that's usually a good proxy for, that they've got a level of kind of sophistication in their approach, and that's usually a good thing. So, yeah, I think, unfortunately, there's no one easy kind of like look for this thing, but, certainly third-party verification and analysis, and also kind of like the breadth of what an organisation is talking about is a kind of good indicator. Yeah.
Great.
The other thing is reach out, contact a company, dig in, because again, from a often what you'll find is the person, the sustainability person who gets your query can then take that to management and say, look, more and more people are asking us about this stuff. So, engage directly. Highly recommend that.
Yeah, great. Good tip. Thanks, Kate. There's a couple more questions from participants. One from Emma. Thanks, Emma. Going back to the purpose of the organisation, like connecting brand to purpose and sustainability, and then having that embedded throughout the organisation can dramatically increase the branding process and cost. So, question for the panel: from a branding perspective, are you finding more organisations already have it embedded in the organisation, and so it's just another part of the brand, or are you finding you're having to help them define and build that and then brand them?
That sounds like a Vince question, and I'm going to plug my charger in. So one second.
Oh, geez. Well, I guess the question, I don't have the answer. But the question, is it more expensive? Increase branding process and cost. Does it? I mean, maybe it doesn't. Traditionally, probably people would have thought it did.
I think regardless of whether an organization already has it as part of who they are, I think in the branding process, it's about guiding that and helping to ascertain and determine the role that plays. So, say Simon Sinek's Golden Circles, for example, does the sustainability and does that play a role in the why, in the purpose of the organization, or is it how we go about things, or is it in the what we do? So with pollination, it goes right into the DNA of why the organisation is set up in the first place. So that is their why. Delivering net zero is the purpose of the organisation. Whereas we might work with another organisation, say a sugar-free ice cream brand. Their purpose isn't focused on sustainability, but how they go about things. And they look for ways in which they can be more sustainable as an organisation through their packaging or their choices of suppliers. That goes into their how. So I think it's the role for branding and brand strategy is about guiding and providing facilitation and support to determine where that sustainability message or focus belongs in the brand strategy. And it'll be just as expensive.
Value for money.
That's right, it's investment. I hope that answers your question, Emma. And Emma also mentioned, Kate, that she loves the active use of values. You talked about how you're actually using values in your interview process. So it's great to hear. As a branding agency, we see the usual values bingo. We've got we respect each other, we work together, we've got integrity, we're honest. And that really makes our hearts think in branding, to be honest, when we see a set of values like that. Because if you don't have those things, there's a real issue.
Yeah, exactly.
So great. You used your values actively in the interview process. And then you also said that you have a weekly catch up as well when you talk about values.
Yeah. That's well, twice with the whole global team, and then with the Australian team, we dig into them more as well. I think it helps to keep. It both helps to keep what they are top of mind. Like, can you rattle them off? Do you know what they are? But it also, it's a really interesting process the weekly reflections we do and where we've seen our values lived well. It's almost like it's building out over time the definition of what each of the values are. Because, words can mean different things to different people, but when you're consistently hearing how those values are being embodied or, how people are seeing that in behaviour, that's a really, it's a really great way to kind of to develop a shared understanding of what the values actually mean. So, it's got kind of a double benefit that weekly share that we do. We are recording them. We're keeping a list of the kind of, recording the behaviours that we've seen or the good value share. So I haven't rethought about that for a while, but we need to think about how we're going to summarise that at the end of 12 months or whatever and, share that back.
It'd be cool to see how you continue with that beyond 40 people. You become, potentially hundreds of people.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's part of why the recruitment piece, like including recruitment, is so important, because it kind of sets this norm right from the start that, like, this is a thing that our organisation cares about, and it's an expectation that we have. And so, it sets that kind of, obviously there's a lot more work that there needs to follow to kind of continue to embed them in the organisation in the right way. But it does, I think, right from the start, it sets that norm that this is a thing that, our values are an important part of pollination. So,
how do you think, just talking about values still, I just want to wonder, and you've worked in many marketing roles, when you come into an organization that's starting out, obviously it's not easier, but you have a clean slate, you have a vision, what you want to achieve, etc. And you can work towards unpacking those values. When you come into an organization that's been going for 20, 30, 50, 100 years, like Qantas, and you come in and how do you evolve an organization's values? Because often when we talk to organizations, they come in because people have lost sight of the values, or they're not aligned with the values anymore. The whole company has kind of lost track, like Qantas did. Other organizations have. And then the marketing person comes in going, you know what, our team's not living and breathing it, they're not united, etc. They're not on the same page.
Yeah.
How do you do that with an organization? How do you kind of re-energize or reinvigorate a business?
Yeah. I mean, I think that a critical part is the team feeling a sense of kind of ownership over them. Now, in our case at Pollination, that's because a whole bunch of the people were there defining them in the first place. But I think that the process that we go through now, where we weekly talk about how we've seen the values lived in action, and a whole bunch of people, 30 people who weren't involved in designing them, join that conversation or have to share something or whatever it is, that is a way for them to buy into what the value is and what it means. Like that is a kind of cycle of continuous ownership or expanding ownership, I suppose, to the whole team. So I'm hypothesizing now, but I wonder if that is, would be a useful technique or something that would help in big organizations, because you kind of, it's like you're letting them evolve and people are feeling ownership of them over time. The other thing I would say, the double-edged sword, catch-22, whatever, of a new organisation with our values. Yes, it's great because you get to create them and you have a clean slate. But there's this interesting thing that I notice where because we're at the start and because we're setting culture, there's almost like every bit of behaviour or a thing you see feels like particularly precarious. Like, we're at the start, we're setting the culture. We can't do that. Like, that's not the culture. Don't take us there. And so there's this kind of like heightened sensitivity, I suppose, to behaviour and values, which, is ultimately, I'm sure, a good thing, but that can feel sometimes, like a challenge as well. I suppose it's just a different thing to those big organisations where culture feels set in stone.
That's good. Good answer. Is there any more questions coming up there?
There's another question. This question from John. It goes back to the poll, I think, in thinking about the role of government and the role of businesses and the role of individuals. The corporate need to agree to create alliances between corporates to bring positive change. The example he's given is green fuel, like Qantas and New Zealand Airlines, for example. Is it about alliances in corporates?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the influence piece, right? And so it can be across those alliances might be, up and down your supply or value chain again, or it could be kind of across, with your competitors or, partners, depending on how you see them, across your industry as well. So, yeah, absolutely. And we see there's a really interesting, I'm not going to be able to remember the name of it now, but big energy players in Australia that only in the last 2 weeks, unveiled a very ambitious partnership around decarbonising their industries and accelerating the transition. We Mean Business is another massive global alliance of global corporates who are working together. So yeah, absolutely. There are lots of those alliances out there, but also there's so much opportunity for more. You know, I mean, at Qantas Future Planet, that was exactly what the power of that program or that business was. So we came in and Qantas bought a lot of carbon credits for its own offset program and initiatives. And so we looked at that. We'd been doing it for a number of years, and we decided that it was a capability that we had developed, that lots of other businesses were trying to develop their own carbon neutral products and services but didn't know how, and we did. So we would come in, and whether the start of the conversation was always around carbon offsetting, but I mean, that was part of the conversation, but arguably the more interesting conversation was the one that you could have when you then had 15 or 20 big corporates like ANZ or Australia Post or Tesla and all of these businesses that we had in the mix, bringing them together, and the conversations that then happened across and between those organisations, and then the kind of spin-off initiatives that would come out of that. Like, that was the really exciting bit. And so, yeah, I would absolutely encourage, and I have seen the benefit of those alliances across industries and up and down value chains. Absolutely. It's a really great point.
Well, look, we've got. Nope, John's happy with those answers.
Good.
I love it. He's just got the thumbs up. It's brilliant. Look, we've got 39 beautiful people still there. So thank you so much for staying with us. It's been such an insightful talk. And Kate Rayson from Pollination, thank you so much for your passion, your insights, and the discussion that we had tonight was really insightful. So thank you. I also thank Debbie, my co-host, for all your efforts, Debbie, on and off the camera. And you'll be joining me next Thursday, I think it is, isn't it, guys?
Week after.
Week after. So as I said before, it's a 3-part series. Week after, on a Thursday, we're going to have Andrew Simpson from Vert Design. He's an industrial designer. And Blake Lindley of Edge Environments, as we're going to discuss about how businesses and individuals can clearly and effectively measure their impact. So we're looking forward to seeing you all there. We'll be sending out another email so you can re-watch this if you want, and also share it with other people. And we can also log on for the future ones as well. So thank you so much for attending. Thank you, Kate, and thank you, Debbie.
Thank you, guys. Everyone. Good night.
Bye.